Greetings and welcome to another special Morrowind Top 10 video. As always, I'm your host, Elf Guy, and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 dungeon mods for Morrowind. And you know, who doesn't like a good dungeon? After all, dungeons are the real meat of role-playing games like this. Without them, you really wouldn't have much to do, and as massive as a game like Morrowind is, there's always room for a few more dark and dangerous adventures through ancient ruins, tombs, and other forgotten and forbidden places. And now the subject of dungeon mods is a rather curious one when it comes to Morrowind, because in many ways, Morrowind is a game that sort of spans genres, a game of a unique era between the age of D&D role-playing games like Daggerfall and Arena, and action RPGs like Oblivion and Skyrim. And while the dungeons of Morrowind are mostly hand-built, the dungeon mods that have been made for Morrowind reflect two very different beliefs of what makes a good dungeon. Probably a good 40 to 50% of all Morrowind dungeon mods are actually randomly generated dungeons that bear more similarity to the dungeons of Daggerfall than they do to the handmade nature of the dungeons of Morrowind and Skyrim. These randomly generated dungeons are largely massive, maze-like places with lots of enemies and very little loot, and usually just a bit barren overall. And personally, I come from a different school of thought when it comes to dungeon design. I believe a good dungeon should be handmade and employ a mixture of environmental and written storytelling to captivate and intrigue a would-be adventurer. As such, since this is my personal top 10 list of Morrowind dungeon mods, we will not be looking at any randomly generated dungeons in this list, but rather just hand-built and unique dungeon mods. And I understand that some of you may have a very different list of dungeon mods that you prefer, and you may well like randomly generated content more so than what we're going to be looking at here. And that's really just a matter of personal preference, and anyway, I apologize for rambling so long. Due to the unique split of the Morrowind dungeon modding community, I thought it necessary to get that disclaimer out of the way. And of course, you'll find down the links for all the mods that we'll be looking at today down in the video description below. First up, we have number 10, Wonderwind, and this is actually a new mod being released by King Moria in October of 2015. And unlike most of the mods on this list, Wonderwind is recommended by characters starting at level 14 above, and for each of these mods that we'll be looking at today, we'll be providing a recommended level guideline for those who might be curious. And now before we take a detailed look at this mod, it has to be said that this is not the first time we've showcased Wonderwind, or even the first time it's been included in a top 10 list. It was also featured in the top 10 Morrowind mods of 2015, and for all the coverage that we've given it on this channel, I have to admit it does have some issues, including a missing animation error that causes a game crash in one small area of the mod, and of course the usual dirty references that will need to be cleaned out before playing. And if not for those issues, it would probably be ranked a lot higher up in the list here. But having said that, Wonderwind is a one-of-a-kind and truly unique mod, and it's just absolutely massive, probably one of the biggest dungeon mods that we'll be looking at today. And much like Blackreach and Skyrim, Wonderwind is a large hub-style dungeon with massive underground areas that connect to various ancient ruins, tombs, and other caverns. And this is without question one of Wonderwind's biggest features, this atmospheric and massive underground icy domain that you can explore with numerous landmarks and locations to visit. Though I must apologise for the amount of pop-in that you're going to notice here. My distant land settings aren't that great, so you might notice a few things popping in and out in the background here. But ignoring that, this is one of the main things that makes Wonderwind so unique. It's the only real Blackreach style dungeon mod that I know of for Morrowind. Though as I say that, I know there's at least one team working on a Morrowind version of Blackreach for the second annual Morrowind Modding Madness competition, so that may soon change in the future, but either way, there's at least 15 hours of dungeon delving content to explore here, with a wide variety of dungeon environments for you to fight through, and the author actually estimates that there might be as much as 35 hours of total playtime if you try to explore and loot everything, and that's just a massive amount of content to be sure. But of course, one of the problems with this content is that there's no quests to speak of, or stories being told, and that's actually my fault as it turns out, because King Moria asked me to write a few quests for the mod, but I've just, never gotten around to it. Perhaps someday when I have a bit more time, I'll get around to adding a proper story here. But one last thing to point out, Wonderwind isn't just a dungeon mod, it also comes with a decent sized underground settlement, full of friendly NPCs and numerous services like enchanters, alchemists, and a smith to repair your gear, while you're out, fighting monsters in the massive dungeons of Wonderwind. Now, there's far too much content here to show off everything in detail, but there's some just really unique and atmospheric environments here, and if you're looking for a big, long, and perhaps most importantly, a challenging dungeon roll to go on, Wonderwind is an excellent mod to check out, hence why it's our number 10 pick for the best dungeon mods from Morrowind. Now, moving on, we have number 9, Dungeon and Diamond, first released by the legendary Archimaester Antares in September 2011, and this mod is recommended for characters starting at level 5 and above. Now, unlike Wonderwind, Dungeon and Diamond is actually a really small dungeon mod with perhaps 45 minutes of content, but the reason it makes our list here at number 9 is quite simple. It's one of the most unique and creative dungeon mods made for Morrowind, which is to be expected given the author's track record of making amazing mods. In particular, Dungeon and Diamond is geared towards thief-like characters, with the goal being to make it to the center of the dungeon and loot the treasure, in this case a rather large diamond, while avoiding traps and picking locks and, all those thief-like things. And this isn't really so much a run-and-gun style dungeon. Fighters who just want to bash in someone's head will have a difficult time here, though the few enemies that you will come across are actually pretty easily dispatched, hence why our level recommendation is so low. But if you're a clumsy fighter, you're bound to set off one of over a dozen unique and certainly deadly traps as you try and make your way through the dungeon here, something an agile and graceful thief or roguelike character will have far less trouble with. And really, these traps are the main focus of Dungeon and Diamond, from the floor that suddenly, falls out from under you, revealing a pool of lava, to crossbows that'll trigger and fire into your back, boulders that'll come crashing down from the ceiling, spears stabbing out of walls, and rickety boards that'll collapse when you try to cross them. There's just a ton of dangers that you need to look out for, that you don't normally have to worry about in a typical Morrowind dungeon. And yes, I know a lot of these traps were featured to some degree in Oblivion, but as far as I know, this is the only Morrowind mod to feature many of them, and it makes for a fun and unique challenge. And of course, this wouldn't be an Antares mod without some new and unique creatures, including animated skeletons that'll come to life as you get near. And even though this is a fairly small dungeon, and we really can't show off that much without, spoiling everything, it has just enough unique content that it more than deserves our number 9 spot for the best dungeon mod to Morrowind. Next up, we have number 8, Ruins of Serpenthold, first released in 2004 by the Undying One, and updated with a Nexus release in 2013 after the fall of PES. A character between level 25 and 30 is recommended for this mod. And now before we get really into this, I do need to mention a few issues, namely that this mod wasn't technically speaking fully finished. It was originally planned to be part of a series of dungeon mods, with the author announcing most recently plans to making a Skyrim sequel, but that never happened, so the dungeon and story here end somewhat abruptly. And the other thing is that since this is an older mod, it does need to be cleaned first, before you, install and play it, so that's another thing to keep in mind. But other than that, this is a large imperial fortification off the coast of Solstheim, where a large imperial castle has seemingly been abandoned and lies in ruins. And while this mod doesn't have a quest or anything like that, there's a lot of environmental storytelling going on here, with various documents scattered about that you'll discover, reviewing exactly what happened to the population here. And in many ways, this is similar to one of my own mods, the Haunted Tavern in the West Gash, though of course we're not going to be taking a look at that here today. And in that this is, a massive dungeon that you can explore and discover, reviewing bits of the story as you go. And to make no mistake, this is a truly massive dungeon, with over 24 interior zones, and probably somewhere between 8 and 12 hours of content. And at first you'll be dealing largely with goblins, which is a bit odd considering this Imperial Fort is out in southern Solstheim, where there's never really been any goblins before. But you'll find documents talking about a mysterious build-up of a goblin army that originally overran the place, before more evil and strange forces took over. And this means you'll eventually encounter the undead and shadow demons further into the castle you explore, and these aren't quite so easy to kill as goblins. For every one of these shadow skeletons you kill, another one will suddenly appear to take its place. And this is really where the higher level recommendation comes from, because it won't be easy getting through these areas alive. And all in all though, whatever you may think of Ruins of Serpenthold, it is a very atmospheric and certainly quite large dungeon mod, especially for something built in 2004, and it's worth checking out, if perhaps not something you'd want to, keep in your permanent save game. Either way, it provides a unique and dark dungeon delving experience with a little side of horror and jump scares a good measure, hence why it's our number 8 pick for the top 10 dungeon mods from Morrowind. For our next mod, we have number 7, the famed Abandoned Well at Dagonfell, first released in June of 2003 by J Man of War, and a winning entry into the Planet Elder Scrolls Hall of Fame in 2006. A character of level 15 and over is recommended for this mod, and possibly one of the most acclaimed dungeon mods from Morrowind, and certainly one of the earliest. The Abandoned Well at Dagonfell was one of the first truly hand-built and atmospheric dungeon mods made for Morrowind, using the oh-so-simple well in Dagonfell as a starting point for a massive dungeon romp that would take you through a wild underground adventure involving ancient ruins, legendary artifacts, and murderous orc clans. With over 17,000 downloads to date, Abandoned Well at Dagonfell is probably one of the most played dungeon mods from Morrowind, And yes, I know that probably doesn't sound like a lot if you come from the Skyrim modding community, but trust me, for Morrowind that's actually, quite a lot for a dungeon mod. And anyway, getting back to the mod here, the Abandoned Well at Dagonfell has you doing a quest to investigate why the water levels of the Dagonfell well are dropping. And this will, take you through a number of fairly detailed and massive underground caverns as you try and discover the source of the leak here. And this atmospheric and custom design of these caverns is really one of the reasons why this is in our top 10 list here. Aside from the mod's historical importance, it's also just, really beautifully built. And these caverns feel a lot more natural than anything you might find in vanilla Morrowind. But anyway, this will eventually lead you to the ruins of an old Dunmer stronghold, buried deep beneath the rock and dirt of Ardenfell. And far from being abandoned, a clan of orcs under orders from some orc king somewhere have moved in and begun excavating, hoping to find some lost artifact of the Dwemer deep in the dirt. And there's, of course, a fair bit of storytelling here, with documents left behind for you to find in various journal entries as you go further into the ruins here. And while this certainly isn't the biggest dungeon mod that we'll be looking at today, it's really more of a mid-sized dungeon, I would say. It does still have about 2 to 3 hours of content, and certainly some really interesting locations to explore, though we'll be skipping over most of that here in order to avoid spoilers. And in any event, Abandoned Well at Dagonfell is a pretty impressive mod to explore, with some really great storytelling, and that, combined with its historical importance in the community, makes it our number 7 pick here. And moving on, we're next going to be taking a look at number 6, Face of Hortator, released in May of 2013 by Intragris and recommended for characters level 15 and over. And in a way, this is a fairly similar mod to the Abandoned Well at Dagonfell, only obviously newer and more ingrained with the game's existing lore. And much like the last one we looked at, this one is focused around the excavation of some ancient ruins deep in the Ashlands. But instead of orcs, you'll be facing a group of hostile Dunmer, who have been digging through the rock, dirt and ash trying to recover a religious artifact of some sort, the Face of the Hortator. There's really a number of similarities in the overall design between these two mods, with the same basic atmospheric and environmental storytelling elements, along with the occasional document, note, or journal left behind by the inhabitants that provides a rich and detailed account of what's going on here. Though again, Face of the Hortator is a bit more modern in terms of design, and certainly more lore-friendly, I would say. Sadly though, unlike the Abandoned Well at Dagonfell, this mod is a bit more underrated. While it has a decent ranking on Nexus, it sort of feels like it gets overlooked a lot, at least from my perspective. Possibly because dungeon mods aren't as popular today as they were a decade ago, and really that's part of a general trend that's been going on for the last few years, where, graphics mods have kind of overshadowed content mods like dungeon mods like this. But anyway, if you're a fan of dungeons that tell a story, you'll find a lot to like here, with caverns gradually giving way to a Velothi temple complex, apparently uncovered by the Dunmer that you just murdered on your way down. And beyond here, you'll find a fair number of mysteries buried in these forgotten ruins, and I really can't understate that this is just a fantastic and fun mod to play, and it's almost a shame that Intragris hasn't made more mods like this, though perhaps that's not really that surprising since he spends most of his time on Province mods like Skyrim Home of the Nords and Province Cyrodiil. But in any event, there's a good, I would say, maybe 3 or possibly 4 hours of content here. This is a fairly sizable dungeon, but I wouldn't go so far as to call it massive. It's really similar in scope to the Abandoned Well at Dagonfell, though perhaps just slightly bigger than that mod, with a variety of enemies including crazed Dunmer miners, powerful wizards, and undead skeletons, bone lords, ghosts, and all that good stuff, as well as a number of Daedra that you'll eventually discover. But we're going to avoid showing off too much here, since this is just a really cool looking mod, and I wouldn't want to, spoil it all for you. So I'll just say that the great storytelling and atmospheric design of Face of the Hortator are what makes it our number 6 pick for the top 10 best dungeon mods of Morrowind. Next up, we have number 5, Suborbital Facility, and I believe this was first released in 2009 by Dagoth Agahim, but the current available version is from 2011, and this mod is recommended for characters starting at level 14 above. And now Suborbital Facility is a pretty massive set of Dwemer dungeons, and this is really a pretty big mod, including 2 entire large Dwemer ruins that'll take hours to explore by themselves, as well as a main quest, and even the option of turning one of these Dwemer ruins into a player home, once it's been cleared out. And the main quest is actually one of the main reasons why the level recommendation here is so high, because you actually need to be level 40 before the quest can start, and it isn't a particularly long main quest per se, but given some of the massive hordes of Dwemer Centurions and Dwemer Cyborgs that you'll be fighting, and yes, I did say Cyborgs, you'll want to be pretty high level here before going into these ruins either way. Now, it should be noted that Suborbital Facility is in many ways sort of a mini compilation of mods, including Hickbind's original Suborbital dungeon and Dwemer Cyborgs race, which has been completely merged here and makes for one of the 2 dungeons that you'll get to visit with this mod. And now, yes, that does mean that part of this mod is a bit on the older side, since Hunkbind's Sobator and Doom of Cyborgs race came out in 2005, and this is particularly noticeable in some of the unique and curious dungeon additions found here, with multiple sort of roller coasters and large open chambers out in the void to fight through, both elements of which were fairly common in mods found in the 2005 era, and some of the rather cool looking roller coaster rides available in this dungeon romp bear a striking similarity to those found in other 2005 and 2006 mods, like Mournhold Expanded by Princess Stomper. But regardless, even in these older parts of this mod here, you'll find a lot of challenging fights, some great loot, and overall fun dungeon elements to explore. But of course, the meat of this mod is Sobator, a truly massive and certainly quite dangerous Doom facility and dungeon off on its own little island, with numerous guards, Centurions, and Doom Cyborg fighters patrolling around the island to make sure that no one can just walk in without a fairly big fight on their hands. And there's also a ton of new items and Doom-themed equipment in this mod, from Doom alchemical items to perhaps a dozen or so different and rather colourful types of Doom armour, and just numerous other items to loot and add to your own collection. And again, while Sobator facility is incredibly massive, with perhaps about 8 to 12 hours of content, it can also be, converted into a player home once the main quest is complete, which makes it a rather useful addition even after you've cleared the dungeon out. And all of this makes for a pretty challenging, fun, and useful dungeon romp, with quests to do and places to see, hence why this comes in at number 5 in our top 10 list here. Getting close to the home stretch here, we had number 4, Balmora Underworld, first released in a standalone form in March of 2013 by Forgore, and this mod is recommended for characters level 15 and over. Now, originally, Balmora Underworld was not a standalone dungeon mod. It was first built for Transmaster's massive Morrowind Rebirth overhaul, and technically speaking, if you have Morrowind Rebirth, you already have this mod in your game. It adds an underground market to the sewers underneath Balmora, called the Thousand Lanterns Way due to the sheer number of lanterns in here, though this is just the tip of the iceberg really. Past the glitter and glamour of the market stalls, you'll find a massive dungeon with hours of content just waiting for you to discover and explore. And that's one of the, odd things about this mod really, is that a lot of people who play Balmora Underworld actually miss the dungeon content here, because the entrance to the whole dungeon portion of this mod is kind of well hidden. I won't spoil the surprise here, but just remember to keep an eye on your map for any door markers or things of that nature. With that said though, Balmora Underworld starts out as a simple, you guessed it, excavation of some ancient ruins located deep beneath the city streets of Balmora. And it's kind of funny how many of these dungeon mods share that same basic premise, isn't it? But anyway, the people working on this excavation site aren't particularly friendly, and they'll attack you on sight, just like all those other mods. And a lot of these do appear to be mages or wizards of some kind, so you'll be dealing with a lot of magic-based attacks in general, at least at first anyway. As you move further into the ruins though, you'll be dealing with a greater variety of opponents, but before we get to all that though, I just kind of want to point out one of the major reasons why this mod is in our top 10 list, and that's the sheer amount of detail and atmospheric design that's gone into creating this elaborate set of ruins, caverns, and sewers here. Balmora Underworld is probably one of the more uniquely detailed and hand-built dungeons available from Morrowind, and I've said this on numerous occasions, Forgore is probably one of the foremost best dungeon modders currently in the community. If you ever get around to playing Morrowind Rebirth, he also designed 2 other fairly large-scale and equally impressive-looking dungeons that are exclusive to Morrowind Rebirth, and he also built a really cool-looking dungeon for Modtown 2015. That project has kind of fallen to the wayside a bit, but Forgore does have plans to either release that dungeon as a standalone or as part of Morrowind Rebirth in the future, so you'll get to experience it eventually with any luck. And there's really just a ton of really cool looking locations included in Balmora Underworld, from the Thousand Lanterns Way Marketplace, which despite not really being a dungeon is still a really atmospheric location, to large underground rivers of lava where ancient Dwemer ruins stick out of the rock, and offer the compelling remains of an ancient civilization promising treasures beyond measure for the worthy adventurer. And all this makes Balmora Underworld our number 4 pick for the top 10 dungeon mods of Morrowind, and you do well to check it out for yourself. Now, coming up, we have number 3, The Nether Halls and the Forgotten Halls, first released by Midget Alien and Valty 7 around 2008, with the Forgotten Halls expansion pack coming out later that same year, and the final version of both mods coming out in 2013. This mod is recommended for characters level 20 and above, and this is without question Midget Alien's masterpiece. Though he's released dozens of mods over the years, I don't think any of them have ever surpassed the quality and popularity of the Nether Halls and the Forgotten Halls, a set of new former dungeons to be found in the mountains of Solstheim that takes heavy inspiration from the Iliad ruins of the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, and indeed for a long time this was probably the closest you could get to an actual Iliad dungeon in Morrowind, at least until Province Cyrodiil's Island of Sook release earlier this year, and JMK's Iliad Remnants dungeon mod that came out in 2016, and as such, the Nether Halls has an incredibly rich and unique design, unlike anything else from Morrowind, including puzzles that you'll need to solve, numerous deadly encounters you'll have to face, and tons of unique former artifacts for you to collect in this moderately sizable set of dark and atmospheric Iliad-style halls deep beneath the frozen wastes of Solstheim. Now obviously, this is heavily inspired by the Tale of the Snow Prince, and one does have to remember that this mod came out originally in 2008, long before Bethesda retconned the former into being some sort of slave race in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. So the sort of in-game lore that the Nether Halls is based on comes largely from Morrowind and Blood Moon, rather than the later games. But still, there's a lot you'll recognize here from the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, including those famed Iliad traps such as the floor suddenly falling away and smashing you into hidden spikes, or magical crystals shocking you with beams of energy. And of course, there's a lot of similar art design here, with the doorways and cages clearly coming from Oblivion's designs, but a mix of Morrowind's dated ruins to make for an interesting and unique combination. And all in all, there's about 6 to 8 hours of content between the Nether Halls and the Forgotten Halls, and these are without question some of the best dungeon mods made for Morrowind. And you know, the Nether Halls actually won entry into the Planet Elder Scrolls Hall of Fame in 2008, and to date, the mod has been downloaded nearly 30,000 times, which again might not sound like much if you're coming from the Skyrim modding community, but for Morrowind, that puts the Nether Halls well within the top 5 most downloaded dungeon mods for the game. And while this is by no means the largest dungeon mod we have in our lineup here today, there's really just, nothing else quite like it. And while it can be a frustrating mod on occasions, with obstacles that are difficult to overcome in order to proceed, it's just such a unique and atmospheric mod that it's more than worthy of being our number 3 pick in our top 10 list here. Getting close to the end here, we have number 2, Darknut's Great Doom of Ruins, first released in 2007 by Darknut, and is still being worked on to this day, with a potential 2.0 release for the famed dungeon mod coming sometime in the near future. A character of level 20 and above is recommended for this mod, and Darknut has been working on this mod for over a decade, with the newest version being released earlier this year in 2017. And the ultimate goal of this ambitious project is to not only overhaul the main quest a bit, but also to greatly expand all the Doomer dungeons of Morrowind. Though as of version 1.3, this is limited to a handful of Doomer ruins, with the ultimate goal of version 2.0 covering everything. And of course, as of this video, version 2.0 has not been released yet, so you can't really take a look at it here. But regardless, what's available on version 1.3 is more than enough to make this our second pick for the top 10 Morrowind dungeon mods. And Darknut Great Doomer Ruins is really quite a massive mod that primarily focuses, as of right now, on the Doomer ruins around Red Mountain, overhauling and expanding them to make for a far more exciting and climatic ending to Morrowind's main quest than rather simple and short dungeons that Bethesda provided in the vanilla game. Not to throw shade on Bethesda, but the in-game dungeons for Morrowind were a bit, well, simple. I mean, just for an example, the dungeon you go to for the legendary artifact of Sunder is incredibly short, and this famous hammer is just lying around somewhere. Not particularly well protected or anything, and there's just hardly any challenge in the vanilla game to really get these artifacts. And, well, obviously, that's no longer the case with Darknut's Great Doom of Ruins. Now you have to go through some pretty large and sometimes confusing dungeons, face a multitude of foes, and occasionally dodge a few well-placed traps that could send you to your demise. There's also a few puzzle-like areas that you'll need to figure out before you can proceed, as well as a number of scripted environments with elevators taking you deep into the heart of Red Mountain, massive Doomer machinery, and inactive Doomer Centurions will suddenly become aggressive if you get too close. And not to mention, there's just a ton of absolutely massive and epic-looking dungeon locations in this mod, with these large open-air chambers that you'll need to traverse, for the ruins of a once mighty Doomer society with nothing left of their people but the numerous artifacts that you'll find lying about. There's certainly quite a bit of fun and epic adventures to go on in this mod, and it really does a lot to improve the endgame and make it feel like an impressive feat to reach Tagatha and defeat him, instead of something that you could do in just about 5 minutes in vanilla Morrowind. I'd say there's probably about somewhere between 7 and 9 hours of content here in total. It'll definitely take some time to play through the entire mod, and of course version 2.0 will be considerably longer whenever that gets released. And besides being a great dungeon mod, Darknut's Great Doomer Ruins is also pretty much the #1 modest resource package for Doomer assets on the market today, including over 100 new assets for people to use in their own mods. And indeed, some of the other mods in this top 10 list actually use some of the resources from this massive package here. And if you're a modder looking to, make some Doomer dungeons of your own, Darknut's Great Doomer Ruins is a pretty good place to start for resources. And now it should be mentioned that Darknut's Great Doomer Ruins was elected into the Planet Elder Scrolls Hall of Fame in 2009. And to date, it has over 40,000 downloads across all platforms, making it one of the most downloaded and most played dungeon mods from Morrowind. Given the impressive size and scope of Darknut's Great Doomer Ruins, It's a little wonder that it's our number 2 pick for the top 10 dungeon mods of Morrowind, and if you're looking for a more satisfying endgame, you should really consider giving it a try. And finally, we have number 1, Sword of the Silk Expanded, first released by the Sword of the Silk Expanded team, led by Trainwiz, in December 2012, with the latest version 2.2 release coming out in October 2014, and this mod is recommended for characters starting at level 13 over. And now calling Sword of the Silk Expanded a dungeon mod is a gross oversimplification. After all, Sword of the Silk Expanded includes dozens of new quests, an entire new city, with hundreds of buildings and NPCs going about their daily lives, and more content than the entire Blood Moon expansion pack, making Sword of the Silk Expanded one of the largest mods made for Morrowind, period. But that said, the dungeons are kind of the main focus here, with over 60 new and massive dungeon cells, providing more dungeon content than the entire Tribunal expansion pack, hence why we're counting it in our top 10 list here. Though certainly if we were to, compile this to the top 10 best mods from Morrowind, period, Sword of the Silk Expanded would probably be, pretty high up on that list as well. There's just a lot to love here, but, enough gushing. Let's get down to some specifics, shall we? Much like Dark Knight's Great Dwemer Ruins, Sword of the Silk Expanded looks to improve upon the endgame of Tribunal, with the Clockwork City of Sword of the Sil, which in the vanilla game was a pretty big disappointment. While Tribunal introduced a number of new features to Morrowind, like traps, puzzles, and maze-like dungeon designs, the premise of Clockwork City ended up being a rather, short series of dungeons, leading to a surprising but ultimately, kind of disappointing conclusion to the Tribunal main quest. And now, with Sword of the Silk Expanded, that's no longer the case at all. Instead, you'll be faced with perhaps one of the largest hand-built dungeons constructed for Morrowind, taking you through over 60 interior cells with massive chambers, countless opponents, unique traps and scripted events, numerous puzzles, and just absolutely beautiful and unique areas to fight through, before you can even get to the Clockwork City at the heart of Sword of the Sil here. There's just a massive amount of content, and really it's hard to pinpoint exactly how much time it'll take you to finish Sword of the Sil Expanded. The first set of dungeons alone will probably take you several hours. I mean, I was cheating like crazy, and it still took me hours to, grab the video footage from a handful of dungeon interiors here, and that doesn't even begin to take into consideration the quests, the Clockwork City, or anything else. I'd say you're looking at, the very least, at about 30 to 50 hours of content here, possibly even more than that. And again, I can't understate this enough, this is just one simply massive mod, and you want to be really prepared before you first teleport yourself into these dungeons here, as they will take a considerable toll on your health. And the unique nature of the Silk Expanded is really just one of the major highlights here. The mod really pushes the limitations of the Morrowind game engine with what's possible with scripted events, with bridges rising out of the abyss as you get close, manufacturing facilities on automation, keeping the wheels of industry turning, and looking for all the world like a scene from Star Wars Episode 2. You'll have to carefully navigate your way through a number of environments, dodging the pounding of various industrial equipment and riding elevators between platforms. This is far more than your typical dungeon delving experience, and there's really nothing else quite like it from Morrowind. Now, I think Trainwiz may have made a similar mod for Skyrim, but as I don't really play or pay attention to Skyrim, I can't really say for sure, but regardless, Sword of the Silk Expanded is a fantastic mod, really a must-play if you plan on playing through the Tribunal main quest here. And for everything we're showing off in this footage here, there's just 1,000 other things that we're skipping over. There's just so much content jam-packed into this mod. And we're barely even going to touch on the Clockwork City here, which is one of the more unique locations built in a Morrowind mod by itself. I mean, the entire city is basically one giant cube, with each individual district built along the sides of the cube, with transporters operating between them. It's a really beautiful and simply fantastic city to visit, and if for nothing else, you should play this mod just to check out the Clockwork City the way it should have been. But anyway, all this makes Sword of the Sil Expanded the undisputed #1 dungeon mod for Morrowind, and I'd really just highly recommend you go play it for yourself. Now, I do have a couple of honorable mentions here real quick. The first one is the Caldera Ancient Mine, first released by Pekka sometime in 2006, and this mod is recommended for characters level 14 over. Now, unlike some of the other mods that we looked at today, I actually wouldn't really recommend playing this mod, or at least not keeping it as a permanent part of your save game anyway, because while this is a fairly detailed and massive dungeon mod, the author unfortunately neglected to fix a few major issues in it, such as a dialogue bug and some rather curious edits that could cause some problems, which is why we're giving it an honorable mention instead of a numbered spot in our top 10 list here. This means that at most I'd recommend only installing this mod for a quick dungeon playthrough and then, pretty much immediately uninstalling it afterwards. I don't think it's safe to keep as a permanent part of your save game, but that's just my opinion. And having said that, it's a pretty cool looking dungeon, including a quest to find out what happened to some miners who went missing deep in the Caldera mines. Though, fair warning, the quest dialogue here isn't exactly the best, and it's pretty much filled with grammatical and spelling errors, so it really isn't the highlight here. And so the real draw of this mod is the dungeon itself, a massive complex of about a dozen interiors or so, all fairly highly detailed and filled to the brim with a multitude of undead and driven insane miners who will attack you pretty much every step you take. And again, this is really highly recommended for higher level characters. My cheat character actually nearly died in several places, so that might give you a bit of an idea of how challenging this mod is. And given the size of this dungeon and the number of opponents that you'll be facing, this will probably take you maybe 4 or possibly even 5 hours to complete the entire dungeon. Assuming, of course, that you have a high level character, otherwise it'll probably take you considerably longer. And the real highlight here is just the atmosphere and the design of this dungeon, with that atmospheric green lighting and lots of waterfalls, plant life, and rocks to make the mines here feel fairly dynamic, with some custom cavern design as well, similar to what we saw earlier with the Abandoned Well Dagonfell. And really, I'd almost say this is a better mod for modders to take a look at than players, because there's some creative elements in here that might be of interest to those looking to build their own dungeons, but the constant never-ending fighting and the various issues that plague this mod, from dirty edits to dialogue bugs, prevent it from being the best mod to play through. Still, what's here is pretty interesting, and I love all the detail and environmental design the author used, which is why we're giving it an honorable mention. Though there's certainly other dungeon mods that are probably, better worth your time. And now for our second honorable mention, we have Crooked Tower, first released by Norgrim in January of 2003, and this mod is recommended for characters starting at level 5 and over. And now, perhaps unlike all the other mods on this list, this isn't really a massive dungeon or something completely unique and original, like, Dungeon and Diamond or the Nether Halls, but it is a rather curious and certainly perhaps a bit of an underrated dungeon mod that dates back to the early days of the Morrowind modding community. Crooked Tower was one of the first good hand-built dungeon mods we made for Morrowind, and while it might not have all the glamour and shiny new toys that comes with having a ton of new assets, what it does have is a rather compelling dungeon location, with a lot of unique scripted encounters and puzzles. Essentially, this mod involves an old abandoned Imperial fort out in the Bitter Curse region that you can explore if you so desire, though the ruins are dark and half submerged from years of neglect, and as you navigate your way through, you'll find some rather curious additions here, such as a talking piece of paper that you can free and put in your inventory, who acts as a bit of a guide, telling the story of this ruined fort as you explore the dungeon. The whole mod is rather atmospherically designed. It includes a lot of novelty, unique encounters, like a wall that gradually moves backwards, seemingly intimidated by your very presence, or a massive maze that you'll have to find your way through. While it isn't a massive dungeon, and one could argue that other mods like Edcon's Modeston Castle, or perhaps newer mods like Iliad Remnant, are more worthy of mention, these unique encounters and puzzles make Crooked Tower one of a kind in my book, and while it might be a bit dated and on the small side, it is a cool mod and definitely worth checking out. And anyway, that pretty much wraps up this top 10 episode. I know we're missing a lot of dungeon mods here, so feel free to share your own personal favourite dungeon mods down in the comments below. And of course, you'll find download links for all the mods that we looked at today down in the video description below as well. And anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.